Alright, welcome to my review, which has been stuck in the backlog for a while, and this is a review of the Ephilim'S Pandemonium. There's so many things to review right now. There's this one, there's the starter set Warbands, there is the Headsman's Curse and the Void Cursed rival deck as well, so it's just a ton of stuff on my desk right now, but I have to do them thoroughly and in order. I don't want to rush anything. There's no point in giving you guys unthorough reviews, so I'm just gonna do one at a time in the tempo I can kind of cope with. So here goes the Ephilim'S Pandemonium. Before we get going, as always, make sure to like the video if you like it, subscribe if you haven't already, hit that bell button, and leave a comment on this warband. So let's get cracking, and we'll start off with looking at the plot card that accompanies this warband, and it's the change sequence, and it reads as follows. At the start of the round, after the roll-off to see who takes the first activation, but before the first reaction step, play through the following change sequence. If two or more players have this plot card, the player that is taking the first activation plays through their change sequence first, followed by the player to the left, and so on. 1. Choose one friendly changer. Inspire the changer. You can choose an inspired changer. 2. Choose one friendly changer that hasn't been chosen this round. Stagger the chosen fighter. That hasn't been chosen. 3. Choose one friendly changer that hasn't been chosen this round. Give the changer one guard token. 4. Choose one friendly changer that hasn't been chosen this round. Push the chosen changer one hex. So when there are no friendly changes that can be chosen, oh my god, the change sequence immediately ends. So if you only have one, you only do the first part, obviously. And if you only have two, you only do two parts. But always in the same order, right? So you can't start with staggering someone, you always have to inspire first. So this is a quite strong mechanic, actually. The stagger seems very hurtful, but it isn't in the grand scheme of things, because you get to inspire one, you get to push one, you get to give one a guard token, and you will ideally just stagger someone in the back that's not really in harm's way anyway. So maybe like inspiring someone that's up front to give them an extra defense die, or inspire someone that gets a more accurate attack. It's extremely powerful. And I had great use of this change sequence when I played the game, so it's a strong one. So let's move on to the fight cards. Before we do, though, I'm just gonna say one thing: don't be lured to always choose the inspired changer for your aggressive stuff. At least not initially, because you want to make the leader inspired, and then you need a couple of inspired friendly fighters. So maybe hold on to that inspired fighter just until you can get the leader inspired, because you really want to get there. So, and when all other friendly fights inspired, that's also the condition for the changes to inspire. So even if one of the changes aren't chosen to be inspired, they can still inspire by every other one being inspired. So just pay attention to that little detail there. So fighter cards. So first up here we have Ephilim the Unknowable, level 1 wizard. And the leader, obviously, 3 move, 2 dodge, 4 wounds. Has a 2 range, 2 hammers, 2 damage attack. And a 4 range, swirly, wizard level dependent attack, doing 2 damage. And he has a power leech ability, +1 wizard level, while this fighter is within 3 hexes of 2 or more friendly changes. And that is quite easy to have that condition being fulfilled. So he's essentially a level 2 wizard from the get-go. And he inspires when 2 or more surviving friendly fights are inspired. It's not an insta-inspired, but it's fairly easy to do, given that we have the change sequence. So it's quite a strong profile here, so let's look at his flip side. When he inspires, he goes to become a level 2 wizard, but still has the power leech ability, so he can essentially be a level 3 wizard, which is just crazy. And he also has the warp gorge reaction. After a friendly changer is taken out of action, you can draw a power card, which I completely forgot to do, but I still did brilliantly in that game I used them in, so even without that, they are quite strong. His warp staff goes up to 3 hammers. And his change bolt is unchanged. if we disregard the fact that he's a level 2 wizard now. But it's quite a strong profile, so no change is needed really. So let's move on to the second fighter here, which is Spawn Maw. So first up here of the changers is Spawn Maw. 5 move, 1 dodge, 3 wounds, has the mouth trap, 1 range, 3 swords, 2 damage with a chomp! Exclamation mark ability, which means +1 damage if the target is large, which I had great use of versus Morgok in our game. Also has the Warp Blaze magical attack, which is 3 range, 2 swirlies, 1 damage. Let's take a look at his flip side. Inspired, his chomp goes to hammers, crazy accurate there with 3 hammers. Still has the chomp, and the Warp Blaze goes up to 3 swirlies with 1 damage. So quite a potent minion. Well, it's not a minion, he's a changer. But that's a very solid fighter card as well. And his dodge is now 2, so yeah. Also quite hardy here. And let's take a look at Flame Spooler, which is the other 3 wound fighter here with 4 move, 1 dodge, and has the Flame Splash magical attack only. 3 range, 2 swirlies, 1 damage, and has the Warp Splash ability. Its reaction you can do after the deal damage step of this particular attack action. You can give the each fighter within 1 hex of the target 1 warping counter, and then at the start of a round you deal 1 damage to each fighter with 1 or more warping counters. Then you remove that fighter's warping counters. That's also pretty nasty. Let's take a look at his flip side. Inspired, Flame Spooler goes up to 2 dodge, and his Flame Splash now hits on lightnings. Still does 1 damage and still has the same reaction. So it's not a huge damage dealer, but he's a solid fighter nonetheless. Moving on to the little guys, we are at Apotrex, the starry fish. 3 range, 3 move, 1 dodge, 2 wounds. He has the flesh warping appendages attack with 1 range, 2 hammers, 2 damage with lamprey, which means that +1 damage if the target has no move and charge token. Furthermore, he has the Hypnotize ability. After the last power step in a round, you choose 1 enemy fighter, push the chosen fighter up to 2 hexes. After that, push the chosen fighter must be adjacent to this fighter. So, very useful abilities on all of these fighters. Inspired, he goes up to 2 dodge. His lamprey hits on 3 swords instead of hammers, so that's quite a slight accuracy boost and a slight crit fish. No pun intended. Boost as well, and he keeps the lamprey in Hypnotize ability and also is flying, which I forgot to say before. So, quite a nice little fighter. Last up we have Kindlefinger, which is 3 move, 2 dodge from the start, 2 health, 3 range with his Warp Flames, 2 swirlies, 1 damage, and Spurting Warp Fingers, which is +1 damage if the target is adjacent, so that's also quite nice. And he also has -1 damage to attacks that target him. No like adjacent or anything like that required, so that's also quite nasty. Inspired, his Warp Flames turns to channels, so quite an accuracy boost there. Stays on 1 damage and has the Capering Fiend and Spurting Warp Fingers remain unchanged. So that is it for the fighter cards. So let us then move on to the objectives, and as always I am gonna start with the searches. First up we have an awful end. You scored immediately after enemy fighters taken out of action by friendly changers attack action. That's not a lot of conditions to fulfill. 4 out of 5 fighters meet that condition, and you will be sure to score it at least 1 time. It's an easy card. It's a great card, I think, for this Warband. Next up we have Arcane Mastery. You scored immediately after second or subsequent spell is cast by a friendly fighter in the same phase. That's very easy to do as well. That's a great card. Next up we have Callous Manipulate. You scored immediately after an activation step or power step if a friendly change was taken out of action. So it's kind of like Everything to Prove used to be. You score it by losing. You can also score it by having 2 more friendly changes being staggered. But you almost always score it with the first option. So it's just a ridiculous card. It's an awesome, great card. It's an auto include. Closing the Circle is scored immediately after power step if your Warband holds 3 or more objectives. Quite easy to do, and I think that's strong 2 Glory Search. One of the only 2 Glory Search I would include actually for this game. That's a great card as well. Might of the Great Changer. You score immediately after the second or subsequent enemy fighter was dealt damage by a Warband in the same phase. That was also really easy to do when I tested this Warband out, so that's also a great card. Violent Change, you score immediately after an enemy fighter is taken out of action by a Warband spell attack or by your Warband's warping counter. It's a little bit harder to do, but it's still a good card. So 5 great cards and 1 good cards out of the searches here, so we're off to a great start with this deck. And then we have the end phases here. Glorious Change is a hybrid. You score it in an end phase if 2 more surviving friendly changers each have 1 or more upgrades, or 2 more enemy fights each have 2 more wound counters and or out of action. That's quite easy for 2 glory. That's a great card. Then we have Ineffable Capering. Scores in an end phase if your Warband casts 1 or more spells during the preceding action phase, and your Warband made 1 or more successful range 1 attack actions during the preceding action phase. So we don't have a lot of range 1 attacks, so that's maybe the caveat here. Maybe a bit of a trap card, but it's, I mean, Spawnmo has a great attack. So Apertrax also has the range 1 with either 3 swords, 2 swords, depending on if it's inspired or not. Then we don't have any more except Spawnmo there. So we have 2 fights with range 1, and one of them needs to be successful. I guess it's, I think that's a fair 2 glory. It's not a great card, but it's a good card. Then we have 9 Fates. Very flavorful, I would say that. Scores an end phase if the value of the objectives your Warband holds add up to 9, precisely. For example, objectives 4 and 5, you could do it by holding 1, 3 and 5. Or 2, 3 and 4, for example. When you score this objective, if your Warband holds 3 objectives, you gain an additional glory. So either 2 glory for holding 2 objectives, or that adds up to 9, or 3 glory for 3 objectives, adding up to 9. It's a bit tricky. I would say it's okay, but maybe not more than that. So if you're meeting a Warband that one holds a lot of objectives, could be tricky. There is a bit of shenanigans in the deck to change places between different objectives, so it's not impossible, but it's not much more than okay. Rampant spell casting is scored in an end phase. It's a hybrid. If your Warband casts 3 or more spells in the preceding action phase, or you have no power cards in your hand and 3 or more gambits in your power discard pile. We only have 4 gambit spells in the this actual deck, so it's a bit hard to score it in the second condition here. Casting 3 spells requires you to take the spell rival deck, Seismic Shock, which you could totally do and probably should do. I think it's okay. It's not 3 spells is quite the task still, so it's okay. Scornful Stance scores an end phase if a friendly leader is holding an objective. Boring card. It's okay. It's just 1 glory. I'm usually don't want to take too much 1 glory end phase cards, but it's okay. It's pretty easy. Spreading Mutation scores an end phase if your Warband holds more objectives than each other Warband. 1 glory. A lot of similar cards. It's worth 2 glories. It's fairly easy to do with this Warband, but it's also going to be pretty matchup dependent, so I would probably shy away from it. It's okay though. Let's move over to the gambits. So +1 dice and cleave to the first range 1 or range 2. That's called Extra Teeth. Made by a friend fighter in the next activation. Doesn't work for spells unless they are range 1 or 2, which they most of the time aren't. +1 dice. So it's basically Apotrax and the Starfish. I would probably not take it. I would probably focus more on spells in this Warband. They don't really need the extra accuracy. They have quite accurate attacks already. So it works for the leader's staff as well. But it's a pass for me in this deck, in this Warband. Grand Scheming, stagger each fighter with 1 or more charge tokens. I'm not a huge fan of stagger, to be fair. Unless you're playing into that mechanic to score cards, I wouldn't take it. And you won't be with this Warband, really, so pass. Latching Tendrils, choose 1 enemy fighter, push the chosen fighter up to 2 hexes so that they are adjacent to 1 or more friendly changers. That's strong. It's a great card. Pushes are always very, very useful. Mutative Siphon, choose a friendly changer within 2 hexes of a friendly wizard. Deal 1 damage to and stagger the chosen fight. Changer. +2 range to the next spell attack action to a maximum of 6 made by the wizard in the next activation. I don't think it's really needed. I mean, the leaders still already have 4 range. I think it's like a bit redundant, to be fair. Pass. Sudden War Portal. Choose 2 friendly fights that are within 3 hexes of each other. Place each fighter in the hex that was occupied by the other fighter when you chose them. That's very useful. So that's a great card. So you could swap place with a charged fighter and an uncharged fighter to be able to activate someone else without charge, for example. Then we have the Will of the Architect. Pick 2 feature tokens, place each feature token in the hex the other feature token was in when you picked them. So that helps score the 9 fates. But if you're not using that, it's not all that useful, I guess. It's a good card. It could mess up opponents' glory as well, but most of the time won't. But you could swap place with a like a gloom hex with a objective, I guess. But yeah, it's okay card. Then we have the spells. Bolts of Siege, gambit spell 1. Channel, if cast, choose an enemy fighter within 4 hexes of the cast, you deal 1 damage to and stagger the chosen fighter. So your leader gonna be level 2 wizard or level 3 wizard most of the time. So it's extremely easy to cast. It has a good range, damage and stagger. That's a great card. Nasty card. Field of Change. 1 channel. If cast, you can reroll 1 dice in defense roll made for friendly fighters. Persist until the end of the round. That's amazing. That's also a great card. Just reroll for every friend fighter for the entire round. Wow. And easy to cast as well, so great card. Shared Mutations needs 2 channels. It's a bit daunting, but if you cast it, you deal 1 damage to each fighter that's adjacent to 1 or more friend fighters. Probably won't have all that many. Yeah, you could potentially get a lot of damage out of this card, but it's a little bit hard to cast even with 3. Level 3, I think I would shy away from it. I would pass. Summoned Abominations. 1 channel. If cast, place 1 friendly changer that's out of action on a starting hex. Yes, that's very good. Include it. Great card. Let's move on to the upgrades. Nefarious Defenses. Reaction uses during an attack action that targets this fighter after the determined success step. If the attack succeeds, -1 damage. Until the action has been resolved. Then you deal 1 damage to a visible friendly changer within 2 hexes of this fighter. So you kind of swap out the damage to hurt another friendly fighter. But it's going to be very telegraphed with an upgrade. So I'm going to pass, actually. Writhing Tentacles. You cannot give this to a large fighter. Reaction, and you don't have any large fighters. So use this after an activation step or power step in which this fighter was dealt damage. Pick 1, heal 1 this fighter, or push this fighter 1 hex. A lot of time when you're damaged, you will die, so the reaction won't go off. And it's also very telegraphed, right? So I don't really like it, so pass. Then we have fighter restricted cards. Changer restricted here. Either Tether. It's an illusion, which means -1 dice from enemy fighters' attack actions. That's pretty good. Even if it's telegraphed, -1 dice is always useful. Arch Sorcerer is for the leader. You can reroll 1 dice in this fighter's casting roll. always very useful, right? So a great card. Aura of Mutability is also for the leader, +1 dice. Attack actions made by friendly changes within 2 hexes of this fighter. So it's not +1 attack dice, it's just +1 dice, so it works with spells as well. That's pretty useful. It's only within 2 though. I'm not sure it's really needed. And you kind of want to keep the leader back maybe, so it's not always going to have an effect. It's good, but I'm not sure I would include it, to be fair. Then we have Boundless Change. When this fighter makes an attack action, each friendly fighter within 3 hexes of the target supports that attack action. That's the restricted for a change. 3 hexes is quite good. But it doesn't work for spells, because those doesn't have support on them. And the guys that can actually benefit from support don't really need it, because they have fairly accurate attacks. So I would pass. A Skittering Terror, +2 move while charging. It's a good card. They have quite good mobility, so don't really need it, but it's always useful, right? Then we have Spiteful Mouths. Restricted to changes. Uses when this fighter... It's a reaction. Uses when this fighter is the target of an attack action after the determined success step. If this fighter's defense roll contains 1 or more successes or critical successes. If the attacker is within 2 hexes of this fighter, deal 1 damage to this attacker. Also a bit telegraphed, and if you're dead you can't use the reaction, so pass. The Fires of Change is for the leader. It's a range 4, 3 swords, 2 damage, and has the reaction. Use this during this attack action. After the deal damage step for each fighter within 1 hex of the target, pick 1, deal 1 damage to this fighter, or heal 1 that fighter. That's crazy. That is quite crazy, actually. Because you can deal damage to the same fighter you already did damage, because he is within 1 hex of it himself. You can also pull a lot of healing out of this. It's kind of a broken card, really. It's a great card. The only caveat is that the leader already have a very good attack, so might be kind of redundant in one. But it's a great attack. Then we have too many more restricted to changes. This fighter's attack actions have Grievous 1. It's okay. We have a lot of dice throwing around here with both the Apitrax and Spawn more, right? So doing an extra crit damage there is even more nasty. So Spawn more could pull 4 damage off them with his attack. So yeah, that concludes the Warband. So as you have heard, a lot of cards got the great rating here. So it's gonna be a 5 out of 5 Warband, this one. It's very strong, if not a slight bit broken maybe, and it's definitely the stronger of the two in the season box here, the Wyrdhollow box. So you're gonna have a good time with this Warband. Personally, I don't really like playing really strong Warbands, so I'm probably not gonna play a lot with them, to be fair. I prefer being the underdog if I can help it. But if you like really strong warbands, this is one for you for sure. So if you enjoyed this review, make sure to like the video, hit that bell button so don't miss out any further content. Subscribe if you haven't already, and leave a comment on your thoughts on this warband. So without further ado, take care